I don't know about you, but I happen to love hot takes videos. So naturally, I had to create my own hot takes on knitting and crocheting community types of things. Just keep in mind, this isn't good fun and it's just my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and come right out of the gate, and the hot take that I have is I think it's really silly when people get huffy and upset when someone who doesn't knit or crochet calls it the wrong craft. First of all, they're showing interest in what you're doing, and there's no need to be all like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm actually, meh, 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 meh. Like, how is that helpful or kind or any of the things that, the knitting and crochet community is supposed to stand for? But also, if I remember correctly, English is either the only or one of the only languages in the world where we differentiate both crafts with different words. So in Japan, if I buy a knit or a crochet book, it might have both types of patterns. And I actually know that because I do have a Japanese pattern book somewhere in my piles of stuff that I haven't fully gone through. And I was really hoping at that point to figure out how to translate it. Luckily, it's 2024 now, and it's probably a lot easier to run it through, some sort of AI translating service. So I guess my procrastination has that going for me. But the point is, they didn't differentiate, and I can tell, being experienced in both crochet and knitting, that this book offers both types, and they clearly didn't differentiate which craft they were catering towards, because in that culture and in many cultures, anything involving yarn could be taken either way, and I think it's pretty common. I don't know for sure. And if you're not in the US, I would love to hear your thoughts on this and your input. I think it's more common in other countries for, if you're into knitting or crocheting, that you do both, or at least know basics of the opposite of what you might prefer to do. So I really think we just need to let it go. There is a way to gently correct people, especially if they're asking, hey, did I call it the right thing? Because a lot of people do kind of understand that. And honestly, they probably got used to being lambasted by people like, yeah, that's not what I'm doing. And it's just like, all right. So they'll probably never ask you again what you're doing or show any interest in your projects or much else for that matter. My next hot take is, I don't like scrappy projects, asterisk, usually. Meaning, I don't like the mishmash, kind of just whatever floats your boat. For the most part, I just don't jive with that, but that's also like kind of an internal thing. I'm not someone who listens to jazz, which is also like a lot of improv and just, I just can't. There's no reason. It's ridiculous. I understand that. Now, there are some scrappy projects that I think people either coordinate beautifully or put a little bit more time and effort into thinking about what the next color they're going to pick and choose for whatever that project is. And those ones usually turn out pretty beautifully. And there are some that probably were accidents, that the person just had the type of taste where those yarns just naturally went together because, their yarn collection is of a certain type or color scheme. I don't know where I was going with that, but the point is, I'm not someone who is probably ever going to do a scrappy project because I would put so much pressure on myself to make it one of the pretty scrappy projects that it's not going to happen. And then I'll somehow like mess it up and make it like too not scrappy, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that's all. I'm not a fan of scrappy projects, but if any of this stuff floats your boat and I don't like it, that's fine. You do you, and I can still appreciate the amount of work and effort that went into your project. It's just not for me personally. I guess similar to scrappy projects, and this is, I don't know. I don't even think it's the scrappy nature of a temperature blanket or scarf that bothers me, because most people do pick out colors that make sense, and there's that potential for a beautiful gradient, and there's just so many combinations of a temperature blanket or scarf, or there's just all these wonderful new ideas like using kind of a African violet. I think that's what it is, like that kind of granny square hexagon thing, or pentagon. I don't know. There's a ton of wonderful like innovations on that. I think what bothers me is the expectation that I am going to keep up on this for the entire year, because if I get too far behind, I'm just not going to finish it. And I know someone's gonna be like, well, you could just always look back at the history and see what the weather was that day. And I'm not going to do that. So, good on you if you can actually keep up throughout the year, or you have the willpower to, you know, go back and look at it if you got far behind. I just know that is way too much pressure for myself personally. So I'm personally not ever going to do anything temperature related, but of course I am definitely going to admire your temperature blanket or scarf if you happen to make one. Moving into an unpopular like that I think I have, and I was this way from day one, one of the few diehard supporters from day one when Lion Brand Homespun came out, and I still love it. And I still occasionally buy some. I just bought some this past fall. I didn't get around to using it yet. And I understand it. I think by the time it came out, I had been crocheting. I learned when I was 5, and then I want to say I was in either my late teens or early 20s when Lion Brand Homespun came out. For me, it wasn't a huge stretch to just understand how to use, you know, a little bit more of a fun yarn. I think it was also after the Fun Fur came out, and I managed to get through that. So like if you can get through Fun Fur, you can get through just about anything. I personally don't think it's that difficult to see the stitches. Now, I don't know that I've ever used the darkest shades and colors in Lion Brand Homespun. I genuinely don't remember. I know I have used it so many times, and I still go back to it every so often. And now the color selection just isn't the same. So I'm a little bit concerned that it might go away, and it might have at some point gone away. And I'm probably one of 3 people actually still buying this stuff. So if you ever are wondering, why does Lion Brand still carry homespun yarn? It's me. I don't know. I just love it. My next hot take is stash shaming. And genuinely, it doesn't matter which way it's going. It just needs to stop. Everybody should carry the amount of stash that they feel comfortable with. And it doesn't matter if you are filling an entire room in your house, or if you only purchase yarn for the project that you are working on and that is it. Like, that's totally fine. There is no right or wrong answer in this, as long as it fits your budget is probably the only caveat that I would put with that. And so if I actually pulled out all of my stash and all of the yarn tucked in places, the closets here and there, and yeah, it's almost everywhere that the cats can't get into. Wherever I could find a free area that a cat cannot get into is where yarn is currently being stashed, and that can be a challenge. So if I pull it all out, I think some people would shame me for having too much. Now, I also say that with, I have cousins who craft some, but don't knit or crochet to the extent that I do. And after I moved into this house and pared down, because, when you move, you get rid of a ton of yarn. So I probably brought like half to 75% of my yarn here. I don't know for sure. And when they just happened to see when I was, giving the tour of the house, they were like, wow, that's a lot of yarn. And I'm like, no, really it's not. So, and it wasn't from a place of shaming from them. I didn't get that vibe, but it's like, yeah, I mean, it is. I have collected quite a bit. And then One of my issues that I'm working through is trying to feel like I don't need to be so precious with my best yarns and have like the perfect project picked out and all of that sort of stuff. I am getting better about using my nice stuff that I'm saving. And the other thing is, I remember when I was largely collecting this much yarn, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I had been out of work, but also drawing workers' comp, essentially. So I was still doing fairly well. My expenses were pretty low at that point. I was, in an apartment and, I just didn't spend my money on really anything else. And I remember one time I was making yet another large purchase at a local yarn shop that unfortunately is, well, they closed for good reasons. They're expanding their family, and so for good reasons. But I remembered making a remark to one of the workers of like, sometimes I feel guilty buying this much yarn or feeling like I'm hoarding or that like I'm spending so much money on yarn sometimes. And I was kind of surprised by what she said. I mean, okay, obviously like she works there. She wants me to spend, my money there and also keep her employed. But she also was very pragmatic and said, there might come a day where you may not be able to afford this. And so wouldn't it be great if you have this wonderful stash to pull from and, maybe you shouldn't feel so guilty about that. And it made me feel better, of course. And then also, as luck or, lack of luck or however, just life happened. And several years later, I had been back to work and then I had gotten laid off again. And then I had just out of necessity had to take a much lower paying job just to at least get by and pay the bills. And for those several years where I just wasn't, getting the same amount of pay or disposable income like I was used to, it was absolutely worth having that beautiful yarn that I could just shop my own stash. So just make the best choice for what works for you. I just think that regardless of whether you prefer a small stash or a large stash, it genuinely doesn't matter because all that matters is, do you still have a roof over your head? Are you still paying the bills you're supposed to be paying? And then, okay, I'm affording the yarn and whatever that I want to afford. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that approach, and that's just me. Should we just go ahead and get through all of the yarn-related ones? I think, let's go ahead and talk about all the yarn-related ones. My next hot take is, it is okay to throw away leftovers of yarn. It's also okay to keep it if you choose to keep it. My point is because I'm not a scrappy person, or I may not, necessarily come up with all these fun little projects and stash busters and things like that. I'll hold on to like a certain amount left of a yarn, especially like, all right, there are certain things where I know I will want to use the rest of it up, but if it's just like a small little clump or wad of it, the odds of me throwing it away in the trash can is pretty high. If I'm being perfectly honest. So if you are a yarn leftover throwawayer, you are not alone. And I just know someone's going to be like, but you can use it for stuffing. It doesn't stuff stuff the way that stuffing stuffs stuff. It just doesn't. So I'm going to throw it away if I don't need it anymore. So the last yarn-related hot take that I have is regarding acrylic. And I think it's okay to hate acrylic. What I don't think is okay to shove it down everyone else's throats. And the part of this that blows my mind is that I feel like there is this subset of it must be natural fibers, it must be this, it must be eco, whatever. And that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable stance to take if you can afford it and you're not allergic to any of the fibers. However, then I see the vlogs where you're going to Starbucks and getting the plastic cups and straws like every day. And so like you think you're saving plastic. Is it just me that notices stuff like that? I don't know. You're entitled to your opinion on yarn. I'm just saying that I'm going to keep buying acrylic. I'm going to keep using acrylic. If you want to use acrylic, if you don't want to use acrylic, either way is completely fine. I just think that if you're against it, you can keep it to yourself, because we're in an age of 2024 where you don't need to educate me on where acrylic comes from unless I'm maybe 3 years old. I just think that that's great if you can afford and wear natural fibers, but I'm going to keep using acrylic. You know, something else that came to mind after filming is that we live in a day and age where knitting and crocheting is an absolute privilege and an art form and a hobby, not something that we're doing out of necessity to clothe ourselves necessarily. It is a bit of a luxury, especially even on the low end. Knitting yourself or crocheting yourself a sweater often runs more than what I would go run over to Old Navy and spend on something on sale. And I would rather people use acrylic or plasticky yarns and still contribute to the artistry and the art form and everything like that with crochet and knitting than to not do it at all. I really think it's a lot more important to keep the craft and the artistry of crocheting and knitting and all the yarn arts alive, rather than just crapping on other people for using acrylic instead of some elite breed of sheep or whatever hand-spun, indie-dyed, whatever. Those, of course, are wonderful things to support, but I would rather just keep the craft alive. Okay, this next one, I don't know if I'm feeling like I'm just being resistant to a trend or my eyes haven't adjusted to this or what, but I'm going to preface this by saying I love and appreciate the amount of innovation that is happening in the crochet community right now and the different types of techniques and styles that are out there. That said, the C2C crochet, the corner-to-corner crochet trend, doesn't really appeal to me. And I think this is just a matter of I haven't seen something or a pattern or an idea for it that has particularly spoken to me and drawn me in of like, I have to make that. I think there is something about that pixelated effect that, I don't know, like I'm thinking if I was going to do something Mario themed, like really like original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, somewhere in that like pixelated gaming era, I would surely do something C2C because I think it would definitely go with that type of style and aesthetic to have that pixelation just in it. But there's a lot of stuff like I just don't get. And maybe because I'm not a super geometric person. And yeah, that's all. It doesn't appeal to me. But, you know, I feel like I say that about techniques and then eventually something grabs my attention, because I remember when brioche knitting kind of was really hitting the scene hard and becoming a trend and thinking to myself, like, it's cool, but I don't get it, until there were patterns that started coming out more and more and more that I was like, oh, I would actually totally make that, except that I still haven't learned how to brioche knit, and my queue of patterns keeps getting longer and longer. So I don't know when or if I'll ever get to brioche knitting, but just I say that about C2C or corner-to-corner crochet, that it doesn't appeal to me right now, but it's also very like kind of new. It's like really I don't even want to say it's at the beginning, because like it's been the trend all year long pretty much. But I think the more it's around, the more likelihood that there will be a pattern that jumps out to me and speaks to me that I will want to make. So for right now, it's just not at the top of my list to learn. And I'm not just like chomping at the bit to learn it for the sake of learning it. Actually, I think that's a really good segue into my next point, which is that just because you are an experienced knitter or crocheter does not mean you are an advanced or highly skilled knitter or crocheter. And I say this again because I just said I haven't learned brioche knitting. I don't know that I would call myself an advanced knitter necessarily, because there are quite a few techniques I don't really know or know well enough or feel comfortable and confident in, like double knitting. It's been a very long time since I've done any intarsia or Fair Isle. I'm probably a little bit more comfortable with Fair Isle than intarsia, but even though I have been knitting for, I don't know, probably 14 going on 15 years at this point, I don't consider myself advanced or highly skilled necessarily. I would take on more risk and adventure into a pattern because I understand it better now, but I don't think my skill set is necessarily something that I have built up, because I choose projects and I choose techniques because I want a particular project, not because I just want to learn it necessarily. And that was also proven the first 2 years that I did any sort of knitting. I only knit or purled. Period. I did dishcloths, scarves, whatever could be rectangular or square or whatever. And I was perfectly content with that because I was knitting just to knit. And I honestly, maybe I was just so happy that I finally conquered knitting that like I was just good with it. And it took me, at least 2 years, maybe even a little bit longer before I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to increase, and my friend is going to show me how to do an increase. And like, that was just like such a banner day. Wow. I was almost going to call myself a loser, but like, I'm kind of a winner because like I got over it and I learned more stuff, and I can do lace and I can do, all of these other wonderful things and cables and stuff like that. But then, I look at someone like, AKA Nora Knits, where, she's really only been knitting 2 years, not even 2 years. I feel like it's not been a lot of time. And like the amount of adventure that she has gone into with her knitting is, just impeccable. Like some of the garments that she's making. Now, some of them I personally wouldn't make because I just wouldn't wear them. And it doesn't mean like she has bad taste. I don't mean it that way. I just like, okay, I'm not someone that's going to wear like a head to toe knit dress. I personally don't think I look good in sweater dresses, so I'm not going to go through the effort to make one. That's just not my personal style. She's got fantastic personal style, in my opinion. There's just a lot of stuff I wouldn't necessarily have made that she makes, and I just get to live vicariously through her podcast. And this point has gone way off the rails to say that, she has only been knitting for such a short amount of time, and her skills just beat the pants off of mine when it comes to knitting, probably. So, whether you're new or you've been around the block, you're where you're at. And it doesn't have to be a contest. You don't have to show everything off or be the most Instagram worthy project and the most elaborate, ridiculous, whatever, or large, or I don't know. All I'm saying is do the projects that make you happy. If you happen to build your skills, that's wonderful. Now with crochet, on the flip side of that, my grandmother taught me, again, I was 5 or 6-ish years old, so very, very young. So by the time I was like a tween or maybe even younger, the stuff that I was producing was far more advanced and skilled than, well, what my other grandmother could make, actually, to be honest. So, it's whatever you want to put into your craft and your art. So I just think it's fun, like, when we learn from each other. I just don't ever want people to feel like it's a contest or that they're less than because they're not doing some, huge, fantastical, ridiculous, lace-cabled, I don't know, brioche, Tunisian, I don't know. I'm just making up some new style of nothing that exists. So I just think if we just do it for the joy of creating and making things that make ourselves happy, that's all that really matters. Ooh, this is a good one coming right off of that. Is speed knitting or speed crocheting for the sake of showing it off for social media? Because I think it's giving a lot of people like that that inferiority complex of like, oh my gosh, they work a full-time job and they're doing YouTube or TikTok or Instagram and they made like 100 plushies this week and I didn't even finish one. That's fine. I just don't understand why there's the need to speed knit or crochet for the sake of speed and to just show it off. Now, I think there's validity in saying this is how much I was able to get done before this market that I'm prepping for. I'm not a market girly. I'm not going to be one of those people. I've accepted that. I'm not. I'm just not that person to do markets. But I also understand if you want to show someone, hey, this is about how long it takes me to make axolotls or turtles or whatever it is that you're putting in your booth, and this is how many I was able to create to show some inspiration. I think there's validity in that, but also just understand that we're all different and we all knit or crochet at different rates. And there's nothing wrong with also just doing the pace that you want to do. There are times where I get in the groove and I can just knit and knit and knit or crochet, 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 and my project is whizzing along. And there's other times where it can be the smallest project ever and it's taking me a half an hour to an hour per round because I'm piddling around and stopping to watch TV and kind of enjoying it just to enjoy it. And I'm just not putting that kind of pressure on myself personally. So I just think we need to stop making it a contest. I also low-key suspect some people are collecting more than a week's worth to show off in what I did in a week. Obviously, I can't confirm that. I don't live with them. I'm not monitoring what they're doing. I'm not their knit or crochet police. Believe it or not. Maybe they really are that fast. And again, there's times where I know I can crank some stuff out. It really just depends on what my hands want to do and how they want to cooperate on any given day. But I just wish we could get away from having this crafting community be such a contest. And I don't know. I was going to say like there's an award at the end and we just had the Yarnies and even I thought that was pretty fun. So, take my opinion with a grain of salt. Similarly, I don't know if this is like a contest thing or if people are just so addicted to overstimulation, or excessive stimulation. And this is coming from someone with autism and ADHD getting ready to say something that I don't understand the need to knit and walk or crochet and walk or learn how to knit and walk or crochet and walk. And what I don't understand, and maybe this is just me, because if I'm going to go outside or, go on the treadmill or whatever and just take a walk and clear my mind, that's the whole purpose, is to clear my mind. Not to think about what I'm knitting or crocheting. I think, for me personally, I would rather just enjoy the activity meaning walking, for the sake of going for a walk. And similarly, a lot of times I will feel that way about crocheting or knitting. And I guess if you're someone that, if you're like, okay, but I'm also trying to get myself to move more and walk more, then this is a way to kind of incentivize myself to do that. Sort of, I get that, but I don't know. I personally am not interested in attempting to learn how to knit and walk or crochet and walk or, whatever. And I would just rather enjoy those activities separately for what, they are to me. And again, I'm not crapping on you if that's something you like to do. I just personally don't get it. That said, I also feel similarly about when you're hanging out with friends or family. And I say this because I know, or I have heard of some people that complain that their families will complain that they're knitting and crocheting at family functions all of the time. And I don't think I have ever gotten that complaint. And the reason is, yes, sometimes I will at family functions. Sometimes I will not. A lot of times I just enjoy being present, hanging out with my friends. I don't drag along whatever my project is at that given point because I want to be in that moment. I think we've gotten so used to multitasking as a society that we just don't enjoy each individual activity for what it can be. And if you're like, well, but they think it's rude. So okay. What would be so wrong if you went 2 hours without knitting or crocheting? And, I know someone's going to be like, well, but I wanted to finish this thing by this, self-imposed fictitious deadline in my head. Well, you just heard what I thought about it. So, I don't know. I just kind of feel out the situation. And I actually just did this, was it last weekend? I feel like I stopped to visit my cousin who had just had heart surgery. She's fine, by the way. And I had my tote bag with me. She's like, oh, did you bring your crocheting or knitting or whatever? And so I showed her the project. And I was like, yeah, I brought it in just in case I felt like I wanted to work on it. And she's someone that, if we're just hanging out, would not mind if I did that, especially on a mindless project where I can still interact with her. But then I just didn't feel like it. I was just like, I'm enjoying the company and I don't feel the need to grab into my bag. And that's fine. Kind of rolling off of that too. So this is like a 3-parter is I love watching YouTube or TV and knitting or crocheting just as much as the next yarny. But sometimes I just turn everything off. I don't even do music. None of that. I just am curled up on the couch. Maybe the cats are around, maybe they're not. And just kind of, especially at the end of the night, just have everything else out and just crochet or just knitting. Honestly, there's so much beauty in that and so much just presence and mindfulness about I'm doing this thing. And it's just the simplicity of what I'm doing. And it just goes back to why can't I enjoy just doing this one thing without feeling like I have to multitask or, stack tasks and stack interests all on top of each other for the sake of it. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Let's do a super fun one. 'Cause why not? This is going to sound silly. I recognize that before it comes out of my mouth. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this one, but 100% I fully believe in the boyfriend curse. And not just to a sweater, to really any knitted or crocheted project. Anytime I have done any sort of project thinking I might gift it to, a male suitor or, some man that I was interested in at that time, spoiler alert, it didn't work out. So, fictitious or silly? Maybe. But for now, until this has got a wedding band on it, sorry fellas, I'm just not making you anything at all. You're just gonna have to wait. Okay, I promise there's not that many left. The next one is all of these pattern roundups that are recommending projects that you haven't actually made yourself. And the reason that this hit my list is because I made a pattern and then coincidentally did a review on this pattern, but I made the pattern because I saw it in a roundup And if you go look at my review, I think I gave it a B or a B minus. And the more I think about how that pattern actually was, D plus at best. Because really the only reason that I managed to get through it and have a successful little Grim Reaper is because of my experience level and being able to tell that the pages were out of order and that the photos were out of order. And it's riddled with mistakes, but I happen to use a chenille yarn that hides a lot of mistakes, and also, well, just don't look at it too closely. And at the end of the day, it does look like a little Grim Reaper, and kind of I'm glad I muddled through it for the sake of, like, he's really cute and often lives at work, and so he gets a lot of compliments from people at work because it's cute to see the little Grim Reaper at my desk. And but otherwise, I don't even remember who recommended it. I was just like, this pattern is crap. And that was actually a lesson to me to not be the person to recommend a pattern that I haven't actually made, because I'm not really giving you real information. So yeah, can we just stick to recommending patterns that we know you can actually follow? Because I cringe at thinking now, like really thinking about it all over again. If I was a beginner or novice crocheter, I don't know that I would have finished it. If I'm being perfectly honest, I would actually have to ask my friend at work how hers came out if she got around to doing it, because I forewarned her, oh, by the way, this is what you're going to want to do with the pages and the photos, and they're all out of order. So like, she had me to kind of help her. But otherwise, it was a hot mess. Another hot take is, okay, for my fellow YouTubers out there, a lot of you are getting better at this because I think you're recognizing it and seeing it. So if you're getting better at it, give yourself a pat on the back. But I wish more, YouTube like creators like myself would remember, and like, we know we create these videos and we have this expectation, or that a lot of other knitters and crocheters might be, just watching our video and just happily crocheting along. And so we might be looking down. So then you're going to talk about something and you're going to flash it on the screen. And then by the time I look up and I'm like, then I have to rewind it, and then I go too far back, and then I don't know, like, are you just trying to get more watch time? Because like, kind of I get it, and like I can see where sometimes that works, but then there's times where I'm like, oh, whatever, I don't care, and I don't bother rewinding it. Or if someone's gotten really bad on that, I will click off the video because it just gets annoying after a while. So if you think 2 seconds on the screen is long enough, and then you're going to talk about it for the next 5 minutes, it's not long enough. I'm telling you, however long you're talking about whatever pattern or project it is that you're working on, like however long you're talking about it, I wouldn't mind seeing it on the screen the whole time, especially if you're talking like about details, and then like I can look at it again and be like, oh yeah, I see what you're talking about. Okay, cool. So that's actually, maybe that's just more of a request than a hot take as a selfish viewer that just wants to see your beautiful work or patterns longer as I'm knitting or crocheting, and just understand I might have been looking down and counting, and by the time I look up, it's not there, and anymore, I probably just missed it, and I'm not rewinding. I'm sorry. Patterns. Okay. So we're kind of down the pattern rabbit hole. And I think this is something I largely noticed. This is something largely I noticed a lot on Ravelry patterns. And it's kind of getting better. But I understand that when you take your photographs for whatever your pattern is and you want to show off this project, that there is some artistry in taking these beautiful photos. But if you're covering up half of the project by like and like voguing and like half of the shots are all twisted and like, no, I want to see the neckline. I want to see if there's anything interesting in the back detail. I want to see how long it is. I want to see the sleeve construction. Okay, this is a store-bought sweater, by the way, but like, this is just to prove a point. If there's any other little interesting details, I want to see what I am going to make. I don't need to see these, beautiful mountains in the background, or that you're twisted up and that you can contort yourself on a horse and rock formations and kicking the beach seashells and splashing up waves, and I don't know. I think you get where I'm going with this. I want to see what I am making. And I'm not saying you can't include any of those fun, artistic, photographically beautiful, compositionally wonderful photos, but there better be photos that show me what I'm making and how it might look on me. I know that's a shocker. I know it is. So I think the last few years it has gotten better because of, this huge rise in popularity that knitting and crocheting is really making this huge resurgence. And, when that happens, more people are less tolerant of, why would I buy this thing if you don't actually really show me this thing that I want to do? So I think it's getting better, but it still happens, and I flat out will just click off of it and find literally anything else to make that fits what I'm looking for. Just show me the project. Now, on the flip side, I'm coming at the customers now, or, the gimme pigs, meaning you want a, pattern and you want to gimme it for free. And I think free patterns are great. I just still came out of like the old school way of patterns where like you paid for it unless the designer was doing like a promo, like maybe the first week or month of that pattern was free or discounted, or it was kind of a thank you for supporting me all year long. Here's a free, somewhat simpler pattern, but still it's free. Or they're just trying to get in new and more traffic. It was more of a like thank you and more of a community thing from the designer to the community. And I just feel like there's so much entitlement, or almost more of like, maybe not entitlement, but almost this sneer of like, oh, look at this thing I made for my markets and it's one of my best sellers. And last market, I made $400 off of it. And the market before that, I sold $150 worth of these. And well, but unfortunately, it is a paid pattern for like $5 or less. And I just feel like that's crusty. And I say that also having also been on that side of like not wanting or being able to necessarily spend money on patterns and sticking to only the basic free patterns that were available. Sometimes designers, like after it had been released for a certain amount of time, they might go ahead and make it a free pattern or severely reduced price. But for the most part, it was the more basic stuff, the more simple stuff, maybe a little bit out of style. And so like there was a time in my life where I bought 0 knitting or crochet patterns. I just didn't. And I accepted it. I accepted that I didn't want to spend money on a pattern. I'm not going to be able to make some ridiculously cabled lace whatever thing unless I magically found the willpower to design something like that, which is not going to happen. So I just mean that like designing a pattern is really, really labor intensive. There's so much that goes into it. I actually do have one on Ravelry, and maybe it's more of like a recipe. I would have to look at it again. And even though I put it out with the idea that it was going to be relatively inexpensive, and I believe it's free right now, that was a lot of work. And then to have someone else look at it and make sure it made sense. And then, in my mind, like, if it's free, then you don't really get to complain too much about like how well it's written or not written. Like the Grim Reaper one, I was salty because like it cost money. For something that's free, don't expect someone to spoon feed you or teach you how to necessarily knit or crochet for free from this PDF. Like, cool if you can find something like that and it works for you. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, there is, again, some validity to giving back to the crafting and yarn community. I just think we don't appreciate the designers that much. And granted, we live in an age where there's a ton of free patterns. You can go on Instagram and find 10 free patterns in probably 30 seconds or less. And there is some coolness to that. Like what a time to be alive for that sake. I just don't get when you complain about something costing money. On the flip side of that, I have also paid a premium, like the $7 to $12 range, for a very shoddily written pattern before, and that's also hyenas. But like, by and large, if it's a decent pattern and it's well written, just pay them, appreciate it. Don't pass it around to everybody and their brother and sister and aunt and uncle and whatever. Like, I've told people, no, I'm not sharing my pattern. I'm sorry. But like, if it was worth the money that I put into it, I feel like you should also put some money towards that designer because it is so much work. I don't know. I guess that's all there is to say about it. It's so much work. Appreciate the designers. And if you don't want to pay for patterns, that's okay. Just, it is what it is. That was like, I don't want to end on that one. That one sounds like a bummer. Let me think of another fun one. Okay, let's end on a fun one. And the fun one is, it's okay to only knit or crochet for yourself. I fully support being a selfish knitter or crocheter. I have in the past done plenty for charity, but even if you've never done anything for charity or to gift or give away or anything of that sort, that is perfectly okay because the amount of time it takes to learn this craft and skill and to improve your skills and really learn everything and the amount of evenings that you can spend on making anything, there's nothing wrong with that being your self-care, that you are making yourself, whether it's a garment or a blanket, any accessories, anything like that. I fully support selfish knitting and crocheting. So if this holiday season you are feeling a little burnt out and like you don't want to make anything for anybody else for Christmas or Hanukkah or any other gift giving thing, don't feel obligated. Don't let other people guilt you into it. You get to enjoy this all yourself. You're also not obligated to teach anyone either. I don't know, like that's like another secret tip. You're not obligated. And you can like just tell people you're a bad teacher and like you're just not the person to learn from. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share it with another yarny friend because those weren't all my hot takes. I actually have 2 very scorching hot takes and I'm holding those off until either I offer it as a membership level or until I'm monetized. I haven't totally decided yet. I can't wait to share that with you when I hit whatever milestone I feel like will release my scorching hot knit and crochet opinions. I guess maybe that just makes me a little bit of a Grinch. And if you want to hear about why I'm being a Grinch this Christmas season, go ahead and join me right over here.